Dr. Russell, do you recognize what is now depicted on the TV screen, which is marked as Exhibit 5?
Yes.
How do you recognize it?
Because I see a very distinct pattern of wounds.
And have you reviewed this exact photograph before?
Yes.
You have mentioned the various types before of characteristics you called highly characteristics of a dog wound and dog-inflicted wound. What I would like you to do, please, do you have a pointer?
I do.
Can you please test to make sure it works?
Yes. Okay. It works.
What I'd like you to do in your own words and with the court's permission, I would like you to use the pointer and go through with whatever method you believe is appropriate to describe each of those wounds and how you assess them.
Okay. We will go from the shoulder area down to make it easy. So, first of all, the overall impression is there's numerous abrasions and that they have a pattern to them. One can see that many of them are parallel in nature.
Can you use the pointer? I'm not.
Yes. So
I wasn't seeing the thing.
Okay. So for instance, the set of wounds closest to the shoulder up here, and these, by the way, are all on the posterior surface of the arm, posterior, and maybe this part is a little bit towards the medial, the lateral portion of the arm. But they all have so they're parallel. They're linear, meaning they look like a line, or they're not round. Or these are at least are not round, and so these. Do you want me my interpretation, or do you want me to just describe?
To stick with those, and what I'd like you to do is you've described them. You said linear, etc. Have you completed your description of them before you get to how you reached a conclusion as to the source of that area you just did a circle around? Have you completed your description of them?
Yes, I've completed my description. How I came to the conclusion involves all of them.
Okay, so now let's then move, before you get to a conclusion, let's move to, in whatever manner you would like, the next wounds and how you assess those.
Okay, so, and by the way, on this first set, there's a very, very faint linear abrasion between these two prominent linear abrasions. Okay. Proceeding down the arm towards the elbow, we have another set of wounds, which consist of parallel abrasions. This time it looks like there's two in the more anterior portion of that lateral aspect of the arm, and then another linear abrasion down below here, as well as a superficial punctate or round tiny lesion below it.
What do you mean by punctate?
Punctate, I mean small and round. And there may be another punctate lesion right there. So that's this group. Proceeding down the arm, there is this irregular group here of multiple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 linear abrasions at least, and then 2, possibly 3 punctate wounds below them. And this is right over the elbow area, and there might yes.
You mentioned irregular with regard to some of those wounds. Why do you describe them as irregular? And is there any significance to them being irregular? Don't go to your conclusion yet. Just you use the term irregular, and I want to make sure the record's clear what you mean by that.
Okay. Well, so a few of these individual wounds have some linear or line-like component, but then as you proceed further down the arm and just below the elbow, there's a couple of wounds here that do not look like a line. So that's what I meant by irregular. So that's this pattern here in total, around the elbow. Then further down the arm, there's two punctate wounds again, right here.
Go slow and say, this is punctate wound number 1, this is punctate wound number 2, with circling the list.
Okay, here's one, punctate wound number 1, and here is number 2.
Why is each of those a punctate wound? Because they look to have a slightly different shape.
Oh, very good question. Because there was movement. There was movement of the either the dog or the the inflicting teeth. Either the dog or the victim. There was movement. Okay. Then there is this group, which are again irregular, because I'm calling them irregular because they're not shaped like a line. And it appears that there's also some what we call movement artifact on those.
When you mention irregular, does that mean it's uncharacteristic or characteristic of a dog inflicting?
It means neither of those.
Good, thank you.
Okay. And then finally, the furthest down the arm is this grouping of linear, I'm going to call them linear because they're line-like, but so linear abrasions, which appear to have a somewhat semicircular appearance, a configuration, and the direction is slightly different. The angle of these linear lacerations are just ever so slightly different than the ones above the elbow.
Is there a medical term that is used to describe the location of those wounds that you just spoke about?
So they're on the posterior forearm.
And is there a medical term for the forearm location down here? Or is it just, you just refer to it as location? No special location?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so please continue.
So those are the wounds of the arm, which is above the elbow, and the forearm, which is below the elbow.
Can you now proceed with regard to each of those wounds or categories of wounds to describe what aspect of dog dentition caused those wounds?
I believe that the ones closest to the shoulder, the two large linear wounds, were caused by the canine teeth, the upper canine teeth of the dog.
What are upper canine teeth of the dog?
Well, the canine teeth are the ones that seem to be most prominent when you look at a dog's mouth. They're triangular, the sort of triangular shape. We humans also have canine teeth.
Okay.
But they are the teeth that, for the most part, grab onto an object.
Please proceed to the rest in
Okay.
terms of describing the dog dentition with regard to each wound.
I'm not sure exactly what teeth made these. They could, one of them could, one set of these could be canine, one part of this, and then an adjacent incisor tooth, but I'm not sure on the second set. So this is this set that's just above the elbow. However, what is interesting and certain is that there's an upper set and a lower set. So this mark was an upper tooth, this is a lower tooth.
So even though you may not be able to identify the specific aspect of the dog dentition, you're able to identify that it is from some aspect of the dog dentition. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Please proceed.
This one this is the most complicated one, because I believe that this set here.
I really wish we could see what Judge Beverly Cannoni is doing right now while Dr. Russell is demonstrating how she came to her conclusions. Because again, it wasn't just the prosecution that filed for the motion for the Daubert hearing. It was also Judge Bev granting that motion. As in, even though Judge Bev sat through the first trial against Karen Reed, and Judge Bev listened to Dr. Russell already, and Judge Bev listened to the other doctor who came for the defense as well already, and Judge Bev listened to the 2 PhD experts from ARCA already, Judge Bev still granted the motion for this Daubert hearing. As in, Judge Bev herself was not convinced during the first trial that John O'Keefe was attacked by a dog. So I wish we could see what Judge Bev is doing right now while Dr. Russell is showing her again how she came to those conclusions.
I believe that those linear wounds and the irregular wounds are from upper teeth, and the punctate wounds are punctures or incomplete punctures from lower teeth. And the reason this whole configuration looks irregular is because the elbow may have been in a different position than it is in this photograph.
What do you mean by a different position? Describe it using your own forearm.
Okay. Well, the elbow was...
Sorry, Your Honor. This is for the court. Can you see it here, or would you prefer she stands up?
It's better if you stand.
Oh, okay.
Well, you know what? I'll come to you. You stay. Go ahead. Show me.
Okay. So
yeah, I would like you to describe what you just meant of the location you believe that the decedent's arm was in when those wounds were suffered. Please stand up. Thank you.
Hold on.
Thank you. So in this picture, the elbow is, for the most part, somewhat extended. It's not bent as much as it could be, and it is not bent as it was likely as he was protecting himself from the wounds.
So you're saying, just so we understand,
I'm going to strike that. Just describe the placement of the arm.
Okay. Well, so the elbow bends, as we all know. And so the skin of the elbow is in a different location depending on whether the elbow is bent or not. So anything that's inflicted will depend on the position that the elbow was in when it was inflicted. I hope that clarified. Okay?
Yeah, please proceed.
Okay. So this is one set, the ones around the elbow. Then there is, going a little further down the arm, there is another set of wounds. The 2 punctate and irregular wounds, halfway down the forearm.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You may sit down if it's more...
Hold on, wait till you choose.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then finally, there's this area down here, which is the closest to the wrist. And there are at least 3 or 4 parallel abrasions there. And it looks like a punctate wound down here. These, I believe, were inflicted by the front of the arch of the dog.
Have you completed your articulation of the assessment of each of the wounds on the arm?
I think so.
In some of your answers, you said irregular, could be. If you use those terms, are you still nonetheless able to conclude whether there is a pattern wound here?
Yes. So the individual marks are characteristic of, possibly more than one cause. However, the combination of the overall series of patterns is highly characteristic of a dog inflicted.
So are you saying that one specific wound could be indicative of a dog-inflicted wound, but the whole pattern itself is how you reach the conclusion?
Yes. Sustained.
Describe how you conclude. Well, let me go walk backwards. What do you?
I think the reason it was objected to, the questioning, is because it was a compound question. It was 2 questions in one.
Conclude from the pattern of all of these wounds collectively.
These were inflicted by a dog, and this was a dog attack.
And why do you say it was a dog attack?
Because there are multiple bites here.
Do you observe any claw marks?
Really good to point that out and to summarize that it wasn't like John O'Keefe was nibbed by a dog, or the dog just gently bit him and ran away, or that it was a mistake. She made the determination that it was a dog attack. John O'Keefe was attacked by a dog at some point, whether it was before he was beat up or during his assault, or after he was already on the ground and the dog was biting him while he was on the ground. We will never know, because again, nobody at 34 Fairview told us the truth. They all lied to us.
With regard to the injuries,
It's possible that this set immediately above the elbow could be claw marks. However, I don't think so on further examination, because I see some punctate lesions which suggest that those are also teeth.
And I get what she's saying. It's like the dog bit down, and as maybe John O'Keefe was pulling his arm away, the teeth went from puncturing his arm to dragging away from his arm as John O'Keefe was pulling his arm away, or as the dog was being pulled off of him.
in forming the opinions and conclusions you just testified to as to the nature and source of this pattern of wounds, did you apply any techniques or analysis that you would use as an emergency room physician?
Yes.
Describe how.
Again, I looked at the wounds and I looked to determine if there's anything else that could inflict that pattern of wounds that were inflicted around the same time. And there is nothing else that I am aware of that could do that.
How did you, did you determine that those wounds occurred approximately the same time, each of those wounds?
Yes.
How did you determine that?
By the appearance of the wounds, the color, yes.
Anything else about the
Color, the fact that there's no healing, yes.
In conducting your differential diagnosis, how did you rule out a motor vehicle accident as a cause of those injuries? Again,
I did not recognize the pattern as being inflicted by any particular part of a motor vehicle. The motor vehicle accident would have caused injuries to other parts of the body, such as the chest and the, other parts. There would be bruises. Motor vehicle accidents cause bruises, fractures sometimes. There were no other injuries like that.
And she, as well as the other doctor, I keep forgetting his name. That's why I can't say his name. The other doctor who testified on behalf of the defense, he also said the same thing, that he didn't see any wounds on John O'Keefe's body that were indicative of an accident, a vehicle accident. And I hope the prosecution's listening. I hope they're listening, but we all know they're not. We all know that their job is to push this narrative along for the DA's office, for Michael Morrissey and everyone else in the corrupt DA's office in Norfolk County. Unfortunately, they are not in pursuit of the truth. But it's validating to hear Dr. Marie Russell remain consistent in her observations. John O'Keefe was not struck by a vehicle, and he was in fact attacked by a dog. And again, notice that the Commonwealth does not have a dog attack in their narrative. They want to pretend that John O'Keefe sustained those puncture wounds and those claw marks from an SUV, even though the SUV would have left some bruises on his body, according to two different doctors who testified on behalf of the defense, as well as the ARCA experts who were certain through their own scientific experiments, through their own accident reconstruction, they were certain that John O'Keefe was never struck by a vehicle.
Do you reach any opinion or conclusion as to when these injuries were suffered, meaning pre-mortem or post-mortem?
Excellent question. I was really hoping he was going to ask that question. So if you didn't hear, it's really important to me that you heard that. Attorney Alessi asked Dr. Russell whether John O'Keefe sustained the dog bite and claw marks before or after he was deceased.
They're pre-mortem wounds.
How did you determine these wounds were pre-mortem wounds, and specify what you mean by pre-mortem?
So pre-mortem means before death. They occurred before death. And the reason I can tell that they're pre-mortem wounds is because they have what we call a vital reaction. Post-mortem wounds, so vital reaction means that there was life in the body at the time that these wounds were inflicted.
And because of the other court cases I've followed over the decades, I know what she's referring to. Typically, a wound that occurs before the body is deceased, that wound will bleed. The blood will circulate to that wound and it will appear red. When the body is deceased, after the person dies, any wounds they incur after death will not be red. They will not be visibly red. They will not bleed.
A postmortem wounds look very different because there is no blood flow that occurs postmortem, so they don't get the vital reaction.
Is it an accepted methodology in the practice of medicine to observe a postmortem photograph of wounds in reaching a conclusion as to the source and nature of the wounds?
Yes.
And why is that an accepted practice?
Well, first of all, it's realistic. The wounds appear the same in this case and in many cases. And then the other thing is because autopsy is a finite period of time, 1 or 2 hour period of time on a certain day, and other physicians can't always be at the autopsy.
So is it common or uncommon for forensic pathologists to use photography to determine the source and nature of a wound such as this?
Common.
How common?
Very common.
How common? Very common. Yeah, because, the trolls online were like, well, she only looked at photographs, so how do we know? Like, how does she know what she's looking at? She just looked at photographs. When in fact, as she was saying, like, the physician can't always be there during the autopsy. So there will always be photographs if a physician is called upon to investigate the cause of a death. So looking at photographs in order to come to determinations is very common.
This may seem like an obvious question, but did you use photographs in forming your opinion?
Yes.
Did you use any ante-mortem photographs of the decedent's right arm in forming your opinion?
No.
Did you observe any hospital records of photographs of the decedent ante-mortem?
Ante-mortem?
Yes.
I don't believe so. I believe.
So Attorney Alessi is asking Dr. Russell if she saw any photographs of John O'Keefe while he was alive, any photographs of his arm while he was alive, like in the past, previous photographs of his arm. And she said no to both questions.
They were all post-mortem. They were right after the resuscitation attempt.
Is it an accepted practice in the emergency room medical community to also use photographs in assessing the nature and source of wounds?
Well, usually the emergency physician's right there.
But in terms of your understood, and is that the best way to assess it?
Yes.
But is it an acceptable way to look at a photograph to assess the source and nature of wounds?
Yes.
And do you remember the COVID world we all lived under?
Yes.
In the COVID world that we all lived under, did physicians sort of accelerate or increase their use of photos in diagnosis, or did they decrease their use of photographs?
I cannot comment.
Let's go to
That was a really good question for Attorney Alessi to ask. It's like he's implying that the new paradigm after COVID or during COVID and then after COVID is that more and more physicians referred to photographs because of a contagion. Instead of observing the body themselves, they would just refer to photographs. I wish Dr. Russell knew so that she could testify to that fact. But either way, it was an excellent question.
Let's go to these wounds. Did you make an assessment as to whether these wounds would have changed at any time from when they were incurred to when that photograph was taken?
Well, I certainly took that into account, and I decided that because, well, basically the answer is no, they wouldn't have changed because the decedent was found in a very cold condition, which was 80.1 degrees when taken, and even at the autopsy, the medical examiner commented in the report that the body was cold to touch, and cold delays postmortem change. So there was really no significant postmortem change of the skin.
So because John O'Keefe was so cold and was left out in the cold on purpose, remember House Long to Die in the cold, 2:27 a.m. search, he was left out there, and because he was left out there freezing, the cold temperatures preserved John O'Keefe's wounds.
Your Honor, may I approach Ms. Gilman for the next photo to make sure we do this efficiently with Mr. Brennan?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry to keep breaking this up in segments, but I will make a part 3 soon. It's important that we analyze Dr. Marie Russell's testimony again during this Daubert hearing. It's extremely important, and again, it all further validates what was discussed and concluded during the first trial. Thank you for watching.